Saturday morning after breakfast, the workshops begin. Pete is in the corner, and the keynote speakers are speaking. There's sports activities in the early afternoon. Pete isn't engaged. Sunday leaves, everybody's saying goodbye. Pete remains on the periphery. Pete wasn't engaged. And we had been checking in with the adults that had brought him to make sure that there was something that we weren't, if we were missing something, and they were checking in with him, and he just was, that's where he was at that weekend. The speakers that weekend talked about responsible fatherhood. They talked about community and interpersonal violence. They talked about images of aspirations for the future. And I personally felt that we had failed Pete that weekend. That meeting, that Young Men's Summit, was always held on the weekend of Super Bowl Sunday because nobody has conferences on that weekend, and the facilities are always available and usually cheaper. And so we would end the conference, and everybody usually got to get home on time to see the Super Bowl, except Pete's group, because they were in remote Inyo County. Pete arrived at home, it ended on Sunday. On Monday morning, there was a voicemail message on the coordinator of the person that sponsored and took Pete. And it was the mother saying, "When you get in, I would like to speak with you. Can you call me at your earliest convenience?" The woman came in later in that day, and she hears the message, and she calls her supervisor, said, "I just got this message. I don't know what it's about, but I'm going to be following up with Pete's mom because, I have to." So she calls Pete's mother, and she gets her on the phone. And the mother said, "This is important. I need to come over there right now." So now she turns around to her supervisor. She's coming in, right? Nobody knows. This woman comes in, and she sits in front of this coordinator, and she says, "What happened this weekend?" And she went out, pulled out the agenda, and starts sharing the thing. And she goes, no, I don't want to know what the agenda is. She says, "I want to know what happened. Because the boy that left on Friday is not the boy that arrived on Sunday." And then the woman says, "Well, what happened?" She says, "Well, he arrived at home at about 12:30 a.m. And he comes in the front door, and he says, 'I want to have a family meeting.' And we couldn't do anything to convince him otherwise." And the coordinator said, "Oh, well, that's unfortunate." She said, No, you don't get it. In all our lives, we've never had a family meeting." Pete insisted, and they had a family meeting at 1 o'clock. He woke his two sisters up, his stepfather, and his mother. And this is what happened. Pete turned to his sisters and said, "I recognize that I have been verbally abusive to you. I have been physically abusive to you, that I have shown you no respect as a brother, and I'm going to tell you now that I know better today, and I'm not going to do that anymore." He turned to his mother, and he says, "Mom, I show you disrespect. I take money out of your wallet. I don't follow your rules, and I'm constantly battling you because I resent that you're not with my father. And I'm going to apologize to you, and I'm going to tell you that I'm going to try to stop doing all of that." Pete turned to his stepfather, and he said, "I have resisted and resented your role in this family since you came in. And now I know better that you're here for the family's good, and I'm not going to do that." What happened within Pete that weekend, none of us had planned. It was all his. Because you know what? Nobody stood in line when Pete was making mistakes and making errors, and nobody stood up behind him to take credit for those failures. So when he turns around and flips it and starts doing good, he gets to claim all the credit for that change. In that instance, that program person and that woman began to have a conversation. This mother suffered from really severe issues with her teeth, and the public health nurse started asking her, "Well, have you ever had anybody look at it?" And then she linked that mother with a dental provider that was going to help her with that. In that instance, the woman said, "My daughters are 15 and 16 and have never had an annual exam, and I want to do that. And so then the woman said, I'll help you do that. As they were setting up the daughters for the annual exam, the public health nurse asked her, when was the last time you saw a physician? And she said, probably the last postnatal visit I had with the youngest one. So then they set her up. This family started receiving medical services and clinical services that were needed. And everybody were standing in line to claim credit. But in this instance, it was the initiative of Pete that was the thing that caused all these things to fall into place. Later I saw him, and I said to him, he didn't know that I knew this about him, but I told him I was very impressed with what he has done in his community in the most generic way. And he was very humble in his approach and this and that. And later on, he kind of stepped into the leadership. It was the last time that he stayed on the periphery. But these are these things that when you don't invest in young men in the community, you don't know how many Petes exist there. And I think that's important. That's really incumbent upon us as program people to really think about that. We had, I remember that they would say, being a man is not having a child, it's being responsible. That they would say that this is the first place that I've ever expressed my emotions and felt like I was accepted. That I learned how to respect myself, and then I could be a good father even if I don't have a lot of money. These were the things that young people would kind of come out of that experience. And, I think that when we talk about male involvement services, and Medium talked about competency, that it's really about the staff that you bring on board. And, the health educator would say to us, that it gave the young men, a broader sense of the community, a greater sense that they learned that others shared issues and the importance of being connected. And that had really very little to do with the health education. But oftentimes people will say, well, we'll do the youth development stuff, but we're going to ignore the sexual health stuff. And I will say to you, do it at your own peril. Because if you were to ask me what is more important, I couldn't tell you. I think they go hand in hand. And if the goal is to reduce unintended pregnancy, that you have to provide information so that they can make those decisions. You might have to do something extra to connect them with each other and whatnot. And